Hello, I'm Jan and I'd like to show you where I enjoy painting in England and France. I'm here on the beach. This is going to make a nice painting exercise. I particularly like this beach because the water is very clear. I'm actually going to paint is the lighthouse. Before you rush to paint, it's always worth having a walk round and see which is the best angle or the best rocks. If it looks too hard, move and miss it out. Lots of shells are all washed up in the same place here, which makes an interesting variation. A ridiculous amount of seaweed. I've zoomed in a bit just to give more detail, and I'll go up close and have a look in a moment. Water here can look turquoise on some days. The brown is the seaweed that's come loose in a previous storm. The local landscape has also got enormous rocks. Some of the bits of seaweed that are washed up are huge, and the whole slipway is covered, which I'll show you on my route back. Also some very interesting pink seaweed. This is washed up from the storm and won't be going in the painting. The lighthouse is actually positioned between two beaches, and there's a plaque to explain why it was built. On this side, it's quite sheltered for swimming in the summer. This is the other one. This is a view of the beach from a cycle path, which is quite interesting to frame the rocks. I'll go further in. It's always nice if there's eyesores that you've got the facility to put bushes in the way. As you heard in the soundtrack, it was very windy at the beach, so I'm now back home and I'm going to try and paint from some of the snaps I took. I was also standing in the tide line, so it wasn't very practical to paint there. So I've got some brushes, my paint box, and I found a paint chart just to show you what is available. You don't need the whole lot, you can mix them, and I would advise you to practice mixing your own and just work out what you've got, be familiar with it. I've completed a sketch of the lighthouse and beach, and I decided it looked better in portrait aspect. I'm now going to paint art masking fluid or latex on top of the white areas of the lighthouse and adjacent building. Don't use your best brush, use one that will wash out easily. And just paint it on, and then the sky paint can go over it and you won't get an odd mark. I'm doing the whole lot to the best of my ability, and the chimney of the building next to it, because that's quite prominent. And then there's a little blob on top which we'll try and do. You can always fill that in later. Well, that will probably take 5 minutes to dry. I don't need to do anything else. So put the lid on and immediately wash the brush. Masking fluid's now dried, and as you can see, it's got a slight colour to it. For the purpose of this lesson, I've got a second pad of paper I'm going to do the work on first to show you, and then transfer what I like to the proper drawing. Both of these pads are Arches paper, rough. I've made some colours up from my palette. I've found the colours I'm going to use in tubes, which is easier for you to make a note of because they're written on the sides. The sky, the rocks, beach, water and the shrubs. Commercially there's lots and lots of colours available, but you can make them, which gives you less to carry. So I'm going to add some variation to the sky. The ultramarine, starting at the top with a big brush. This one is size 12. I'm just putting the paint down, recharging the brush. So I want it to be quite dark on the right. Going again, slightly different strength of water. Just going across. Some sticky tape there, which I'll get rid of. Now I'm going to go round across the lighthouse now, which I can do because I put the latex there. And I put it round the chimney. And I can use the point of the brush to go around the buildings. But it was the contrast with the white lighthouse that was the most important. Picking up various pigment as I go. Change the direction of your brush strokes if you've got any nooks and crannies. Go away from the tight spot. You know, it's a cool day today, so the paint's not drying too quickly. If you were doing this in a very hot day, you might have to work slightly differently. I can get away with it today. Now we've got several variations here. Some of it is wet, some of it is dry. It's deliberately darker by the lighthouse. And there's some little areas of paper that haven't taken the brush. Doesn't matter, it'll add to interest so that it looks as though there's perhaps clouds there. Whilst that's drying, I'm moving down to the beach because I'm going to do the beach before I do the water. And I picked this bit because it was an interesting shape. Now the wet sand is always darker, so I've got a mixture here of yellow ochre and Naples yellow. And further up the beach, I'm just going straight for Naples yellow, which I'm going to feather into the dark sand. Where I was actually standing, I was sinking a little bit because the tide had only recently gone out. And because the tide had only recently gone out, some of the rocks down here are darker than the ones up there because they've obviously had the warmth of the sun and they're completely dry. I'm now changing brushes. The number 12 is very good for the sky and the sand, but I want to get into slightly tighter areas for the rocks. Well, that'll probably do. Now with watercolour, you do light to dark. So I'm just going to go in with a sandy colour for the rocks. I'm starting here because it's easy in the middle. And you try and do your brush the way things grow or the way that they're left if they've been made a long time ago, like the rocks. They've been weathered by the water. There's no sharp edges, it's all round. I'm just going to add some yellow in the middle. I'll do another rock. This one's interesting, it's weathered into 3 sections. Just keep going on the rocks because you want them to all look the same. And any highlights can be put on with the next coat of paint. foreground has got a lot of seaweed on it, so I'm only doing the brown around the edge, so I don't want to take away the vibrancy of the green weed. So I'm going to get some very brilliant green now, put it on with a bit of yellow, and that's claiming the space, and then I can go back and highlight it. So I'm going to just drop some yellow in, which will make it sing, and some green at the same time. I'm going to leave that to find its own route. Some of the rocks have got yellow lichen on top, so I'm just going to put that on. I'm now moving on to the grass that is actually the edge of sand dunes, which can dry while I'm doing other things, and I can see that it's running all the way through. I'm going to put it on quite bright because this is rag paper and it will soak in, and then that gives me an idea where the rocks start and finish. It's a long way off, so it doesn't need to be too detailed, just to give an indication, fill the space. To set the tone, I'm now going to put the water in. It's a little bit tricky because it is actually completely clear in places, but there will be reflected light from the sky. So I'm going to start with a warm blue and just go in gently and show you how I'm doing it. The yellow lichen is very dominant in some light, so that'll give it a little glint of colour. I've now given the rock in the foreground a second coat of paint. I'm now going in with a darker colour to highlight the cracks in the rock, which I'm just going to do with a brush with a good point. And there's a few little shadows, just pop those in. Whilst I'm here, I'm also, with the dark colour, going to do the surround to the lighthouse. So I want that to dry. It's going to take a couple of coats. And there's a very dark gable end to this building. It's in shadow. I'm going to try and put that one in. I'm not sure I've got the colour exactly right. Sponge it back a bit and then wait till the building's more defined. And the next thing I'm going to do is the rocks that are next to the lighthouse itself that are actually overshadowing it, and they just need a very gentle shadow in the side. And the same with a very big one. And then the sun's catching them all from a similar angle. While they're drying, I'm going to move on to a big one on the beach. This one's got a darker end, that's more in shadow, so I'll put that in first. And then the bottom of it is still wet from the tide going out, but the top is drying off a little bit. So as the top's a bit dry, I'm going to do it slightly lighter colour. I can float in a wet on wet some of the darker bits and just pick it up. These ones are very dark. I don't want it to dominate the picture, so I'm going in gently. There's beach here, and a few more rocks. So I'm just going to try and pick out the rocks, and then I can decide whether the beach needs its colour changing or whether it's okay. And there's one more at the end that's quite a different colour. Must be the way it's catching the sun. Some of the rocks that are against the sand dunes actually look quite grey, not brown. It might be the way they've weathered. So I'm just going to put them in very gently, and then I can highlight them in a little while when they've dried. So not all flat, they've got areas of weathering and all sorts of things. And it's now showing the area of the beach more. So when they go around to this end, it must be because they're wet from the sea, that they go back to being brown again. You've got to look at where you are and what's happening. Not everything is it the same. It looks like a piece of sea defence here, which we'll put in. They would probably use the local sand to make this sea defence, so it won't be too much of a different colour. So while that's drying, I'm going to take a rubber and rub out the pencil This putty rubber's going a bit sticky now. I've got another one somewhere I'll find. Just going to gently rub out the pencil line that I put there to mark the space. I can rub out this one as well. It's always helpful to claim the space with some sort of mark. In case some of you are watching this on a telephone, I'll show you how to do rocks on a bigger scale. So we always try and draw things the way that they grow or they're made. So these rocks have been washed up by the sea and weathered, so they're very round. So I'm starting at the bottom and going up to the top, coming back down again, putting some more water on the brush, picking up a slightly different colour. Because it's slightly lighter in the middle, it makes it look rounded. And then for the water around it, again, I'm doing it in the direction that it appears. So I'm doing horizontal marks. And it doesn't matter if the paint misses a beat. And it's instantly standing up as two separate areas. But the other thing is the sand. I'm starting with yellow ochre, and I'm going to add a little bit of crimson to make it more of a biscuit colour. Tiny bit of blue going in as well. And I'm going to make it quite weak. I'm adding water, and I'm going to put the sand down, and again the sand will be coming off the water, so I'll do it flat. A bit more. Doesn't matter if you change the brush round, just do whatever's suitable for you. And then where the sand is wet, it'll be darker. So I'm just going to do a darker line for the wet sand. And then some of it might be above the tide line, so I'm going in with some Naples yellow, going with any colour that suits you, feathering it down. If you want slightly more, you can use some water to move it, or you could use some tissue to move it. So what I'm going to do is just put that on gently. You see, it instantly makes it look a bit more dried out, so the tide went out slightly longer ago than it did. You can keep fiddling, fiddle too much at times, but gives you the idea of the rock, the water and the beach. And then there is some greenery there in the background, which is grass on the sand dunes and things that have self-seeded. So if we can put that in. Now that is all shapes and sizes, but mostly it's growing from the bottom up. So you start at the bottom, work up, go in a different angle, just keep the brush on the move. Then you can add a different colour to give it some shadows if you want to. Just drop it in. Find its own place. I hope that gives you some idea. This lighthouse and beach are now finished. If you would like to visit the area and explore the beach for yourself, I'll add directions at the end of the video. But it's done on rag paper, which will take 2 or 3 coats of paint if needed, but the water is very clear, but the rocks are very dominant. If you're not sure how a picture's going, if you turn it upside down or look at it in a mirror or even put it sideways, it'll give you an indication as to how it's coming along, and you look at it more objectively. The only white showing on this painting is the lighthouse, which is the paper. No white paint has been used at all. It's just gentle summer shades. This is a pad of paper, and you have to be careful you don't get it too wet, or you might choose to stick it to a board before you start with brown tape or masking tape. The alternative is the block, which this is on, and there's a space on the side for you to insert your finger or a knife, and you just pull it off. I think I might try a pencil. So I've started it with a pencil. So it's all off, ready for the next picture. Even when the light changes and a mist comes down, you can still see the rocks and the lighthouse. You don't always have to have sunshine to get things to show up. You just have to look carefully at the tones.